Hey. Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Good morning from the United States and good evening to anyone in Sweden or Europe watching us. This is our artist talk today to talk about the collaborative projects between Sterling Rook and Stine Marcinkowski Pettersson. My name is Melissa Diaz and I'm the cultural arts curator at the Deering Estate. I'd like to first start by thanking everyone, including the Knight Foundation, for their assistance and support of this project, as well as the Wild Beast Collective and the Fågelbo residency, as well as the Woo ArtSpace, which hosted the performance by Ms. Patterson earlier this summer. And you'll learn a little bit more about that as we get into the artist talk. So before we start, I just wanted to make some introductions and kind of talk about the format for today. This is a webinar, so your screen won't show your faces. If you want to engage with us and the artist, please utilize the chat function at the bottom. That will enable you to ask questions, and please ask questions throughout the program. At the end of both presentations, I'll be able to read those questions aloud and have the artist address them. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, I will also be monitoring the comment section. So please also include any questions you might have in the comments, and then I will be able to ask both artists those questions at the end. With that said, let's get started. So a little bit about, let me go back to this. So this program, and at least the Deering Estate's contribution to it, started in the summer when Sterling Rook, our current artist in residence, was invited to participate in the Fågelbo residency, a collaborative residency that started in 2017. Let me go here with Ms. Patterson. We were thrilled to incorporate the physical component of this collaborative effort at the Deering Estate because we are committed to the arts. My role here at the Deering Estate includes managing our exhibition program as well as our residency program. So when we were asked to, and some of the things we're going to be talking about today is how we've had to pivot and change and alter this project, how the artists altered the project. One of the things that we really talked about as a group is how we could work together to have this in a physical state at the Deering Estate through a number of different efforts. So when each artist discusses their project, we'll talk about the physical manifestation of each, both in the United States and in Sweden. So I want to again recognize our partners. If you're not familiar with the residency, please visit the Wild Beast Collective website. They do it every summer, so you can definitely, for South Florida based artists, please check that out. The Fat Arts Village in Broward is also a partner in that. Oops, before we get to that. Before we get started, I kind of wanted to also acknowledge, let me stop sharing this so that I can see. A couple of other individuals, both at the Deering Estate, who've helped with this project. Martha Betancourt, our registrar, who's been fantastic. Everyone at the Woo ArtSpace, who's been also very supportive of this project. Our director, Jennifer Tisthammer, and Bethany Gray, our curatorial manager at the Deering Estate. Also wanted to recognize the Bakehouse Art Complex, for which Sterling Rook is also an artist in residence. So thank you to everyone there. This project, titled Belonging Sensorial Movement in the Post-Coronavirus, explores how people around the world have truly become disoriented. Disorientation is really the starting point for this project, so you'll hear both of these artists discuss that. Considering this concept, Rook and Patterson began to investigate how belonging, or how to belong into the world and to each other, that in which our touch and our connection has been limited. It's something that I think we can all kind of acknowledge as part of the cultural zeitgeist of right now in this COVID world. they became really interested in using the idea of using this time in the residency to look positively at Mother Earth as a way to be reborn into our world, and perhaps consider how, why, and with what intention we continue to engage with it. In addition, the project questions and considers how our culture has and likely will continue to change post-coronavirus, especially in terms of how bodies situate and orient themselves in space, and how we will create human connection in this new environment. This project included the creation of new architectural spaces in the rural environment of both the Wu Art Space in Sweden and Deering Estate in the US. Both projects open the senses through listening, through touch, through smell, through sight, and through walking and moving in order to change our body's connections. This collaborative work included an official presentation at the end of the summer at the Wu Art Space, as I mentioned, and a current installation at the Deering Estate. This project will be up through November. It incorporates a multimedia installation that includes work by Sterling and audio by Sheena, as well as a video representation of Stine's performance. And I encourage you all to come and visit and see it in person, because it's one thing to see it in this format, and it's a total other to see it in person. We'll be showing some representations of this project as well as the one in Sweden throughout the presentation, so you'll get a sense of it. But again, please reach out if you have any questions. I'd love to welcome you to the Deering Estate. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce both of our artists. First speaking will be Stine Marcinkowski Pettersson. She's a Scandinavian choreographer and cultural producer based in Gothenburg, Sweden. Her work is primarily interdisciplinary and includes a collaborative practices with other artists and producers. She studied dance and choreography at the Lavan Center, London, where she graduated with a BA in dance theater. She also works together with local communities to implement dance theater projects that engage locals as well as co-creators of performances, and teaches somatic movement and mindfulness based in meditation and yoga. Sterling Rook is a Miami native and an MFA graduate of the FIU, Florida International University. Rook's multidisciplinary practice investigates various artistic mediums to uncover cultural threads, so to speak, the quote unquote fabric of reality. He believes that culture can be seen as a textile manuscript. It carries techniques, methodologies, history, and values intersecting and weaving as threads of meaning and agency. Sterling has been an artist in residence at the Deering Estate since January 2020, and we're very happy to have him. So the way today will begin is that we'll start with Sheena, and then we'll move to Sterling, and then we'll move to our conversation. So with that, I present to you Ms. Stine Marcinkowski Pettersson.
Thank you for that, Melissa. I'm not unmuted, right?
Sorry.
No, I'm live. Yes. So yeah. So I'm actually Mrs. to start off. Yes, Mrs. Pettersson. So that's why I have a second surname. Yeah. Let me just see here. I'm gonna look at my text here. So yeah, I'm a dance artist, performer, choreographer, and a somatic movement practitioner. And I was really happy to be part of this Fågelbo residency summer 2020, and was really happy that I was going to collaborate with Sterling as well. Yeah. So our original idea was that he was going to come to Sweden and spend 2.5 weeks with me at the Wu Art Space. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we decided that he better stay in Miami for health reasons. And we would work apart, separated on our own continents, which was a new experience for both of us, as none of us has worked together like this before. Coming from 2 different art forms also made it an initial challenge, since we had no common ground or language to start off from. I usually work interdisciplinary and really like what happens when 2 or more art forms meet. But not being in the same physical place proved to be a bit difficult in this process, since we both work visually and with our hands and bodies. So from the beginning, the only real physical connection point we set for ourselves was walking. Walking served as an emancipatory and grounding practice. Personally, I engaged in a daily walking practice in nature around Wu ArtSpace to awaken my senses and experience the local environment in silence. I walked as a way to ground myself and not feel too alone in the wilderness. It was a way to connect to Mother Nature and make sense of all the disorientation and disconnection that the pandemic has brought with it. In the first few days of the residency, I did struggle a bit to find myself alone with no one else there apart from these vast and beautiful surroundings. It almost felt like the feeling of isolation of the pandemic that I had felt in my own home surroundings just intensified after my arrival, right until I landed in the nature and accepted the fact that I was there by myself with my own company. Some of the things that did help me to connect myself were not only being in nature, but also having a daily movement practice where I connected to my body and voice through different sensations. As the days went by, I slowly figured out a way to work for myself. By having the same daily routine, I worked in an old barn at Wu ArtSpace, which is also their studio, where you sense, hear, smell, and feel a lot of the outside on the inside. I used my somatic practice, listening and moving from the inside out, experiential anatomy, and the book by Andrea Olson called Body and Earth to deepen my authentic movement and voice practice that I explored anew each day. Every day, I also work with a theme related to Mother Nature in order to inform my body and mind with information that grounded me in the present. In the back of my mind, I had Sterling and my initial thoughts around what have happened to people during the pandemic, the feeling of having become disorientated. So disorientation was a starting point to the whole process, and I certainly felt a bit disorientated on my own in the wilderness. I kept investigating how to belong to the world and other people now that our touch and connection with each other have become limited. The interesting thing about this exploration was that there weren't so many people on the countryside apart from Caroline and Tor, who runs Wu ArtSpace, their little toddler, and a few neighbors. The social distancing and feeling of isolation of the pandemic was not such a big issue for me there. And I simply didn't feel the same threats to humanity in the same way that I knew Sterling did in Miami. Each day, Sterling and I also had conversations around our theme and where we were in the process. From the very beginning, we didn't have such a clear action plan and structure of how to work and what we wanted to create, which became a challenge since we had a limited time to work. It was also a minor challenge that we weren't in the same time zone and had a time lapse on our daily work. Because once I was done with the physical part of my day, he had just begun his. Personally, I made the decision of not forcing the creation of a product. Instead, I trusted that if I just found my own daily structure and routine, the process and product would unfold naturally. And thankfully, it did appear what we wanted to do in the end. I even used our thought of looking positively at Mother Earth as a way to be reborn into our world, as the surrounding nature became my new home and place of investigation and research. When we discussed the type of things and materials that would connect us together, we found that rope could be a nice link, as Sterling had used it before, and we could both relatively easily use it in our own way. We also spoke a lot about nature and trees and the spiritual part of connecting with nature and with each other. So spirituality became a thread too, and we talked about the rituals and prayers some indigenous people have around trees especially. The space I found in the woods therefore became sacred and charged with energy. It was in a wild and natural forest on a hill where I found my home or place of landing. This was then where I decided to do my own rope installation as well as of a live performance to deepen the experience of the place, both for myself and the audience. So on the Swedish side, our collaboration culminated with a live performance in the woods, which included a sound installation with sounds from Miami that Sterling had done. He also recorded himself on video installing at the Deering estate and in his own home surrounding nature, which then became a projection with a sound installation that I had made. We thought of this as a way to melt our different worlds together, creating a sensate connecting link between us, both with the rope and with our different audio soundscapes. I think it worked well, even though it was a bit bizarre performing to Miami sounds in the middle of the Swedish woods. But at the same time, it was a great way to create an atmosphere and mystique around what was happening. I also did 2 workshops, one for professionals where Sterling was with us part of the time from Skype, and another one on the day of the performance. Since I left ArtSpace and finished with my residency there, Sterling had the pleasure of being able to do a more substantial installation at the Deering estate, which is now up and running with my sound installation. He will tell you more about that in a minute. Lastly, I wanted to point out some of the things that we have learned from this collaboration. First of all, you can definitely make art from different places around the world, but the important thing is to have made up a clear plan and structure of how much time you have and you want to put into the work together and for yourself, as well as how to approach your work and an idea of what you want to create. With that being said, it is never easy to be in your home environment and go into an intense working residency, since everyday life is also knocking at your door. Being in a residency place like I was at ArtSpace helps you focus on your work and gives you time to be in the process and not think so much about a product or daily life, since you have nothing else around. It therefore allows you to have more process-oriented point of view and trust in the things that will come as opposed to come. But again, being apart like we were probably the biggest challenge for our process. Finally, I want to send my thanks to Calin Kent, who supported me and acted as my sounding board during my own process and put her time and thoughts into the project. Jenny Larsson for her make it happen attitude and getting it up and running, and my husband who helped me out with some of the practical bits of my installation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I had some images from the project here going through the talk. Thank you. So again, we'll go back to questions at the end, but I wanted to now switch over to Sterling. Let's go back here. Okay, Sterling.
Hi, thank you, Melissa. That was also really great, Sheena. I feel like I should have written something so eloquent. Really captured the process really well. So maybe it's appropriate I didn't try and outline it because that was perfect. Also, thank you to Jenny Larson and Deering Estate, and also Eddie Peñafiel. I think he put the video and he did some of the marketing. And I think he's part of the collective of Wild Beast. My name is Sterling Rook. I'm a visual and an installation artist, a sculptor, a painter, fiber artist, probably foremost. This was certainly an unconventional project. We started with just conversations on the phone, like, what do we talk about? Because these times were very confusing for both of us, especially me being in this urban setting and her over there. We kind of struggled for a while to figure out like what the differences were and what the similarities were and how to bridge that gap. And in the course of our first couple of conversations, we decided to make that the object of our inquiry, that being disorientation. Like we came to the conclusion that people as a whole, humanity was going through a disorienting phase, dealing with touching the world. You know, like you walk into a store, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, and you couldn't just grab the doorknob without a feeling of rejection from an object almost. So there was a sort of rejection from the world as such to us, which became a very destabilizing thing, especially when you take it for granted that you can just touch anything. You know, I'm sure different people went through varying degrees of acclimating themselves to this world, but at the beginning, I was sterilizing everything I bought from the supermarket. So just to touch on that, like that became the focal point of our became our starting point, like disorientation. We're disoriented. We're not exactly sure where to go from here. How do we stabilize ourselves? So Stina's walking practice became, I think, central to that. To sort of, walking is like one of the first things you kind of do on any given day. You wake up and you walk out of bed, and it's a way of orienting yourself and finding stability. And it's a simple practice. Almost anyone can do it. At its most basic sense, you're just moving through space. So I took on that practice whenever I went to Deering, especially, as I would just, and anytime I go to Deering Estate, I walk down to the water's edge and I just look at the fish, look at the manatees. I walk over to the mango grove, and there's a kind of stabilizing effect that walking can do. But I know if Sheena speaks to it more, she could tell you that probably in a lot more detail, the levels that it works on. And in fact, she actually had sent me some of these practices. I'm not sure, were those the somatic movement practices? She sent me some of the practices, which I went to a local park and did. And they have to me, they had a centering and a calming effect, which again, you know, that became the one of the focal points for us. And from there, we tied in sort of the material end, I think, of my practice on exploring a space with rope, with a material. And I think we spoke about early on about that German story, Hansel and Gretel getting lost in the woods. And they used, the first part of the story is they used the breadcrumbs to trail through the woods to find their way back. Or no, the first time they get lost, they use a string or something, and then, or pebbles. I don't know. But the idea is tracing a movement of a body in space, and trying to find your way. And I think collectively, we're all kind of still in the middle of that. So she did her practices, and then we would get on the phone together. We would talk about her practices. I would react to that, and then we'd get on the phone the next day, and I would say, well, here's what I'm going to go do. So there was very much a discourse, a back and forth of like, I'm going to react to what it is you're doing. You're going to react to what I'm doing. And little spurts of, because there isn't just one final product for this artwork, I think. I think it ultimately it culminated in a series of things. I sent her a package of audio from all over Miami, from down to Matheson Hammock Park. Some of the water you can hear. If you see the installation at Deering Estate, you might hear some of the water from Matheson Hammock. You'll also hear the drawbridge from the Miami River. Oh yeah, this is the installation at Deering Estate. So you hear different sounds. So what it ended up culminating is a bunch of small artworks and a couple of larger ones. I made masks for her that I FedExed to her, actual masks for people in Sweden. So that what you'll see at Deering Estate is just one artwork, which is this almost an homage to, I would say, centering practices of spirituality that you would find in different cultures and religions around the world. So if you go back a couple of slides, you'll see, and I just put these as reference points, these fabric tied onto trees and rods. This is Siberian shaman practice. And then if you go to the next one, you'll see this is a Celtic practice of tying fabric to trees. These are all, and always they're accompanied by prayers to either spirits or to the nature as a whole. The prayer is ultimately an asking for. It's almost like a dialogue with something you don't understand, so that you can feel centered. So if you go to the next one, I think there's one more. This is a Japanese practice of tying rope to trees to reach out to the spirits there. So there, I think that the Stine's performance ritual going around the trees had this sort of ritualized spirituality to it that ultimately became probably the theme of the artwork for her and for me. Mine was less performance-based and more representational, but I think it carries the same spirit of attempting to find yourself through connecting to nature. It's one of the simplest things anyone can do, to just go and relax. And we had these interesting parallels too, that she was there at the residency in a very natural setting, and Deering Estate is also this very natural setting, very different, but also very natural. So, yeah, I think I covered a lot of the big points that I think we went through. And if you have any questions, maybe we can move to that, because I feel like I've talked for a long time.
Can I please, make a little comment on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because the thing with the prayer trees also became a part of both the workshops and at least the first one, and then the performance, where we had the audience and participants hanging up at the end a little praying tie cloth, as a way we wanted them to give a little prayer to Mother Earth as well. And that idea sort of became included in my performance, especially, and also the first workshop, which sort of followed us through the whole, as Sterling said.
Yeah, and actually with that note, I wanted to share the promotional video that you worked on with Eddie, because it shows an element of that before we get into questions.
Right.
It's very short, it's just a few minutes, but I think that'll help to ground the conversation as well a little bit with that performance. So I'm going to go ahead and share that. Okay. Sorry, something happened here.
Yeah, it hung up or it's stuck.
Huh. Okay. Well.
People can just go and see it themselves. We can send the link.
Yeah. We'll send that is included in our conversation. Okay. Sorry about that. I'll put the link in the chat as well so people have access to that. So starting with that, I'll start the questions. One of the things from that video that's so interesting is that you hear that sound of Miami in that beautiful Swedish environment, and that in and of itself has a disorienting effect, to hear trains and airplanes and all of these weird sounds within that. Was that embedded, Sheena, in the performance? Like, how was the audience with those sound elements?
Well, obviously Jenny told me she loved hearing them. Jenny lived 14 years in Miami, so she loved hearing the sounds there. I didn't get so much feedback just as to the sounds directly, but at least for me, it was sort of like it gave a focus that was, it gave a dimension, a larger dimension to the focus, like almost like I could imagine that Miami was part of the place. Mm-hmm. And also like a rhythm that was sort of off anything that would have come up naturally if it was without that sound. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, I didn't get so much feedback specifically on the sound from people, but it definitely was this ding 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 was very sort of like, okay, something is happening, you know. They were the audience came up from, they were guided through the woods to come up to the spot on the hill, so they sort of I heard them, and then I sort of coordinated that with the sound, and I think it worked well. Definitely, it was interesting to have all these suburban sounds in this highly charged spiritual place with all the trees.
I have an observation about that too, if I may. I think just like the bell dinging, which that was the drawbridge for the Miami River, but sort of decontextualized from that, it makes me think about many religious practices or spiritual practices that I've seen, even in the Catholic Church. Like I grew up Catholic, ding 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 with the incense, or if you've ever seen like a Buddhist ritual,
yeah,
it often marks like, you know, those sounds and visual and smell, they get you into a focused or slightly augmented state to help you find a place, you know, this sort of centered spiritual place. And I feel like that may have had that, at least in the video, watching the video, that I draw those correlations to like a religious practice almost.
Great. And in keeping with that, this context or ideas surrounding spirituality, I love that you refer to Mother Nature, you know, as Mother Nature and not just a natural world, because through this pandemic, it feels like we've been dealing more with nature as a being. We've actually seen it regenerate. So I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the positive news stories was how nature was kind of taking itself back and healing itself. I remember seeing videos in India where you could see mountains that you couldn't usually see from the cities. Did those types of news stories kind of affect your decisions to treat nature in the spiritual sense as a kind of this being, as Mother Nature, or has that always been part of both of your practices?
For me, if I start, it's always kind of been a part. I've worked with climate change quite a lot, and what happens to the earth. And obviously this pandemic has enhanced or made it stronger, that sense that you have to take care of it, you know. She's precious and she can't take anything, you know. So for me, definitely it was such a, it's become stronger, my sense of it, that there is something we have to really be careful and take care of and nurture and listen to.
And I think, I don't, yeah, for me, it wasn't like an overt influence. I think it was there on a subconscious, unconscious level. I mean, I've always been really into nature and connected, and you know, if you follow me on Instagram, I'm always like in the Everglades, hanging out with alligators. But I think it might have been a subconscious thread there, but also like thinking, I wonder, because sometimes when you think about like Scandinavian cultural practices, oftentimes at least I get the visual image of like almost like what we would call pagan rituals out in nature. You know, I wonder if like, if for Stine, I'm almost asking a question. I don't know, but like, do you ever think of what you do, like drawing from that kind of like historical background, the sort of like pagan rituals, or was just like, is this just my imagination?
I don't know. Maybe it's your imagination. I'm more sort of a Native American kind of, and Eastern, the Eastern world, drawn, like Buddhist, Mongolia, kind of that side. But I think this was probably the most sort of charged project on that performance on that. It became very rich since I was there by myself and I was in nature, and it was such a beautiful nature there that obviously it's not the same feeling if I would have been in Miami doing the same thing. It wouldn't give me the same intuitive spiritual insights or whatever. So I think being in a place certainly does something, and if you are in nature, it really helps enforce and reinforce a feeling of connection. But I haven't looked up those pagan rituals really. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
Can you talk about the concept or how you mentioned you chose rope, and it's so beautiful, it's so metaphorical, it connects us. And I think, again, highlighting the fact that this was created during the pandemic has also connected us, because it's not a one nation problem, it's a global problem, and until we fix it as a whole, it's not really going to go anywhere. So I wonder if either of you could just elaborate on maybe the process of coming together with that as the material that connects you.
Should I, or you want?
Maybe you should start with this.
Yeah, because for me, like it's a material I keep returning to. Like I have family ties to fabric-based practices, and I find rope. You know, I have this part of my practice where I make rope from upcycled fabric, right? I find it to be one of the most universal tools. I think of it as a tool. I don't know if it is or not, but I find it to be one of the most universal tools. In survival classes, they say rope or cordage is one of the most important things you can have. And if you look in any culture, like anywhere you go, like a table or a chair, they're universally found in any culture. Rope, cordage, chairs, tables of some kind, shelter, like these are things that help define and help tether together things. So for me, it's just like a familiar material that I think is almost is probably universal material. So I keep returning to it for like personal familial ties, but I also think that there's just like a, a near universal historical tie to the material. Um, and I like it for its, like you say, sort of metaphorical aspect too. Like it binds things. It's a binding thing. Um, and if you break it down, every piece of clothes we wear is made out of a tiny little piece of rope threaded together. Um, so that's kind of for me. I think I may have lent to that, or that might have been sort of my contribution to the project, and Sheena took to it too. And I think it worked well. And that's why you can see, as I showed you, like everywhere you go, there's this practice of fabric and rope tied to nature.
Yeah, for my part, I always love working with objects, like in my performances. So, and I don't think I've ever worked with that kind of rope. And it was also stemming from this Hansel and Gretel thing, that I would trace my pathway in the woods, like I would do the same. So this repetitive kind of same pathway going around, and also creating some kind of even more charged space in the center of the installation or the rope around, that at least for my workshop participants and also for the people in the audience were like, they didn't enter. It was kind of such charged space that they wouldn't enter underneath the rope. So the rope became sort of like a manifestation of the outside and the inside, or the now and the then, or before and after. It had lots of symbolic, I think. And then this white one I go with in the performance was really kind of tricky, because it was such a thin rope and it took like forever to tie it up. So that was sort of a challenge on the practical part, but it worked at the end.
Great. Yeah, no, the image as a symbol, it's so powerful in both performances and both iterations. And even the image that you guys chose for to advertise the residency, where you're both holding on to the rope, it's really quite powerful. So the other question that I had, and it's really for both of you, is, and it's been brought up before. So Stina, you're a teacher. You work with students and people and individuals all the time. Sterling, I know you have a lot of collaborative projects that you've done, and so that's really embedded in both of your practices. How has creating in isolation, and I know Stina, you talked about it a little bit, but do you see a benefit? Do you see a shift in your work that you've kind of both been forced somewhat into a creative, isolated process, especially considering a part of this residency is the social aspect of exchanging ideas, and instead of doing that physically and geographically, you've been doing it over Skype, over Zoom, over phone calls. Like, how do you feel that it's enhanced maybe some aspects of your practice, or it's been limiting? If you guys could either, each kind of share a little bit about that.
Do you want to, should I start, or?
Go ahead, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I'm also thinking while I'm talking. Well, for me, I was thinking about this thing of that one aspect of this Zoom and Skype thing Skype thing that Sterling and I did. I mean, we started months before the project started in ArtSpace. So I think it kind of our relationship became quite intimate, and we had to there was no we had to go to the point from the very beginning. Like, there was no this like just hanging around, we didn't have time for that. Like, there was or space. There was obviously we talked about how you're doing, and we were always updating each other on the COVID situation, but the way the relationship developed was kind of intimate because we had to talk, but also the nature of the project became quite personal. And this thing with spirituality was a big thing for me, and also for Sterling with even with the Catholic Church and things like that. And obviously the isolation part. I mean, I did have workshops there, but I would say, like, if we would have been in the same space, we would have known each other on a more practical level, maybe not talked so much, so intimate, because there was a lot of reflections coming up as well during the process. And maybe, I don't know, or maybe it would have been too intense because we would have been like rah, 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 talking so much. I don't know, but so again, it was a kind of nice to have that time lapse process in that sense, that we could sort of rest in our own process. But we didn't with the group that I work with. I was there physically, and it was and they really gave me a lot too, for they're part of the soundscape that I did. That it was really nice to apply all the things that I've been doing by myself with the group, and see that, and talk with them about their experience about the pandemic and their feeling about all this with social distancing and isolation, that people are craving a connection, and it's really hard, and still it continues to be hard, because there are all these restrictions even in Sweden. So I don't think, maybe never will working be the same thing again, like practically. I hope. I mean, people from a movement background definitely crave that connection. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I thought of it because, and then I want to get to Sterling. You both use the analogy of Hansel and Gretel, and it's funny because they're siblings. They're together. There's an intimacy there, and they're both lost in the woods. And you two just met this year, collaborating together, and then it's very evident how intimately you've created together, and just in your speaking with one another, how quickly that relationship formed. And that you use this analogy. It's really, really interesting. And sometimes I've spoken with other artists that this kind of quarantine period or lockdown period kind of turns something on creatively, because you're just alone in that creative space, or you're in that creative space with one other person, and there's not all this other noise,
Right.
because it's been taken away. For others, it's difficult, it's challenging, but for some, it's been great. And it seems that has been kind of a fuel for this project, because it's in both locations, it seems so evident. Sterling, do you?
I think that, like, I work personally, I work both ways, sometimes alone and sometimes with others. But I think, fortunately, we live in an age that has really, even though we can't be together physically, like the kind of collaboration that we did embark on wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago with the video conferencing. So it certainly has affected me and my practice, and it certainly obviously has affected this project. But I think that human beings are also really extremely adaptable, and we've made all these technologies to help facilitate that adaptation. And while it's hard, I think we figure it out. Right, that was the question. It was like, how is not being able to be with people affected it? And it's tough, but I think we're figuring it out, and hopefully it's not forever. I still haven't figured out some things for other parts of my practice that are definitely more social based. So there's there is still that sort of sinking feeling of being a little bit like Hansel, somewhat in the dark with no precedent in my experience for anything like this. So I'm still trying to figure it out, and it's tough to know what's right because you do see people getting together doing collaborative things with masks and whatnot. But the science still isn't necessarily there to support that that's a safe thing. Not all the way. So there's a big question mark for me. It certainly affects things, but I'm okay. I adapt, you know, and I think that's probably another theme of this work is of this major theme of this project is adaptation. You know.
Right. So just two more questions. One is, so this is kind of the tail end of this project for both of you. You finished the residency in the summer, so it's been a while since you've had to or been thinking about the creation of this. Is there any kind of final thoughts you want to share about the residency experience since you've had some time away from it now? Anything that you feel might shape your practice moving forward? Anything at all?
I would say that one thing we learned was that you have to start out with an outline if you're going to work in this way, like a plan of action, because we had some issues developing things smoothly. Um, it was just tough, and again, neither of us had a precedent for this. So if I could give advice to anybody, it would be to first thing you do is sit down and make a very real-time plan of action. And this is like life advice. You know, what are your goals, and how are you going to achieve that in real time, in a schedule? And I think moving forward into this coronavirus landscape, you know, we said post coronavirus, but we're still in the coronavirus landscape. You're going to have to prepare ahead of you should prepare ahead of time. I should, you know, preparing ahead of time preparation is key. Sitting and thinking first for a few minutes or hours is key to executing smoothly. I think that's one thing I took away, anyways.
Yeah, no, and I think that also punctuates the fact that when you are working alone, there's an intuitive aspect, but when you have a partner, you can't, you know, they're not in your head necessarily. So
Yeah.
yeah, Sheena?
No, I agree. And also, if you would be in the same physical place, it depends. It all you know, it all depends also on the time you have, you know, like, and as I said in my presentation, it also depends on whether or not you're in a place of complete nothing else, in a residency place, or you're in your home space where there are other things that can distract you. But for working together in the same space, I think that the intuitive part can be more collaboratively done, or, you know, but when you're not together, you have to be really strong on what it is you want to do and the structure. I guess I think it's also it's the same with resident, if you're in the same place, but it's another kind of regularity, or like, where are we going, and then there's the getting to know each other aspect on top of that, you know, and as I said, it probably would be another way to getting to know each other if we would be in the same space, because we would cook and eat together maybe, and have more sort of the social part included, and we didn't. So we didn't just talk randomly during the day, like we'd only set aside one time a day to talk. So yeah, definitely a clear plan, um, uh, and also goals of where are we going with this. But as you were mentioning in the beginning, Sterling, like this thing of this disorientation. What the challenge we had was what the well, what did you say about the something about what we decided to do was actually our biggest challenge, or something we I
That was
can't remember.
the very beginning when I was first talking.
Yeah, just you and I.
I think I said that the the problem became the problem we were dealing with became the object of inquiry for our
Work.
collaboration.
Yes, yes. That sort of puts it.
There
But
was
then I've heard, yeah, then I heard from others that if you're in the same place, it's the same thing. And I've worked different. I mean, I've worked differently with different people, and if you know each other from before, and I mean, there's so many aspects of it. But for us, it was, and especially with the time lapse and everything, it was really, and the different art forms, it was really a need, a bigger need we didn't see before. Um, and then again, a residency should also be explorative. You can't just go in and have it as a product based thing. You need to be in process. So there's all these different factors to it, I would say.
Great, great.
now we have a guideline for the
Yeah,
future.
now we have a guideline. Contact us if you need to do a
We're writing a book.
yeah.
Did you feel restricted? Because you've both also participated in other residencies, and Stina, you brought up such a great point that part of it is this kind of free flowing and sharing of ideas and figuring things out. But because of the limitations, you had to be very focused. Was that something that was really challenging, or did you find yourselves both adapting to it pretty quickly?
Well, I sort of, as I said, also I got support from Caroline at ArtSpace, which was really, really helpful, because without her it would have been kind of difficult to process, all the things that I was experiencing. So for me, I would definitely have wanted more, at least more sort of exchange of process, because sometimes you can't be very focused on that when you just have 1 hour and you talk, and that's it. Then the things you're experiencing continues sort of with you through the day. So that was really helpful for me, and I think that was the lack of not knowing and not having anyone to discuss my process with, otherwise, apart from Sterling once a day. But then once I got into it, it just there was also this the process of the project phase. Like at the end, I just knew what I was doing, so I didn't have so many thoughts around it. I was more just doing, creating. But in the beginning, it was certainly a need that wasn't completely fulfilled with our Sterling's and my collaborative work.
Yeah, I think it was tough. It was tough for
Yeah.
me. Especially the fact that she was there and that was her focus, and then I was here in a completely different setting. It made things a little difficult, and that was part of the process. And looking back on it, like despite any issues that there were with that, I mean, it is part of the learning experience, and I can, like I said, like I just joked about, I can add it to my repertoire of experience to say, um, here's how to do something, here's how to move forward effectively.
Yeah. Yeah, and it comes through. There's a healing aspect of the work for viewers that personally I've experienced in thinking about it and seeing it, and I think that's just so important right now as we're dealing with kind of a global trauma and work that's being produced in this type of environment. It's, you know, it just feels the issues that you've had, the difficulties that you've both overcome really do come through as a kind of healing. So I, that's why I was kind of wondering if it was healing for you to create it, because as a viewer, you definitely get that sensation from both watching the performance in Sweden and then being inside of the installation at Deering Estate.
Yeah, if you look at the installation at Deering Estate, there's a few circles going like this.
Yeah, for sure. Just before we end, I just wanted to give you each the opportunity to share what's next for you. Any upcoming projects, exhibitions, performances, workshops, anything you have that's coming up that you'd like to share.
Go ahead, Sheena.
Well, I'm soon gonna give birth to my first child, so this is about 6 weeks from now. So I have that as my next big project coming up. Yeah.
It's a performance art piece.
Yeah, it's a performance art piece. I'm actually doing a film on being pregnant, so the dance film, but it's not out yet. Finished.
I am working on a public art project with the city of Miami Beach and 9 other artists called No Vacancy. It's a temporary site-specific series of artworks on site at different hotels throughout Miami Beach. So we're working with those hotels. There's that. I have work up at the Coral Gables Museum that you can go and see. I have a studio at the Bakehouse Art Complex and the Deering Estate. Bakehouse Art Complex is not open to the public yet, but will be soon. I think mid-November. That and that. Those 3 things, or 3 or 4 things.
Hey, wonderful. Thank you both. Congratulations, Sheena. That's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Vacancy thing is jury.
Huh?
There's no vacancy. Public work with the city of Miami Beach is a juried thing. So there's 2 prizes. So come and then see and vote for me.
And I want to just again thank all of the sponsors who made this happen. Really, it was the hard work and the intellectual and physical, psychological, spiritual work of Sterling and Stine. But I again want to just thank all of the sponsors, including Wild Beast Collective, who helped and supported this project in different ways. So I encourage everybody who's watching and looking to please follow these institutions and definitely learn more about their great work. With that, I want to thank you all for coming. I especially want to thank Stine and Sterling for sharing their practice with us and their ideas, and invite you all to visit the Deering Estate. And for those of you that can't, we will be posting more and more installation photos online, so you can at least look at the project online. The video that we tried to play, I apologize, is available on Vimeo. So I will be sending that link out so that you can watch it in its entirety. That also captures the workshop and performance element by Stine. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa.
Bye.